Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session in October series. I am Sneha Yadamari, Head of Events at Hacking HR, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Today's topic is especially relevant as we explore compliance and risk management, mitigating AI challenges in HR. So, before we jump into the discussion, I want to give a big shout out to Transparent, our partner for today's conversation. We appreciate their collaboration in bringing in these insightful sessions. And today we'll be focusing on how HR leaders can navigate compliance and mitigate risks when adopting AI solutions. We'll also explore some of the key challenges and best practices to ensure AI informed processes are both ethical and legally sound. And before we dive in, please take a moment to drop a quick note in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. And just let us know how's your climate today and everything. So it feels good to know our global community where it's coming together, and also just to make sure from our back end that the technical system is all running smoothly. And for today, we do have a fantastic lineup of speakers who are joining us today. I know they've been patiently waiting backstage, so let's bring them on. And panelists, thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to share your expertise with us. And now, as we move forward, just a quick reminder if you're not speaking, so you can just have your microphones on and off, just in case if you find there is a background behind you. If there is nothing, then we're good. With that, let's start with a quick round of introductions. Please share a little about yourself and why this topic is so meaningful for you or just resonates with you. So let's kick off with Dina. I see you on the screen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dina Mendelson. I'm Privacy Officer and Senior Compliance Manager at Transparent. I love this topic. And first of all, good morning and thank you for having me. I love this topic because it's so interesting. AI has so many opportunities to improve lives of so many people. But on the flip side, it creates a lot of risk for organizations and for the people whose data is involved. And so I'm excited to be at a talk where people are thinking through how can we use this technology and reduce the amount of risk that we're taking on for ourselves or that we may be creating for others. And then compliance is obviously interesting because in the US, at least, nobody knows what we need to do. And so I know we're going to talk more about that later, but it's a really exciting time in compliance because usually you know what the rules are, but in this area, they're constantly evolving. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the panel. And welcome, Tiffany.
Hello. I'm
Hello.
trying to make sure that my mute is off. Well, hello, everyone. I am Dr. Tiffany Bowden. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I have probably over 15 years of experience at the intersection of diversity and inclusion and HR. So I've worked a lot at the intersection of employment law and compliance and supported, teams all throughout the employee life cycle. But my career has also been very much centered in the tech industry. So I've supported the top 10 tech companies as well. And I've had a lot of experience in building and supporting AI programs and tools as well. So I'm really at that intersection right now of responsible AI, which is something that really needs to be top of mind for HR professionals, as well as all of us who are users. So I'm really excited to be here and sharing that wisdom with y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. And welcome, Didio Vila. So we are glad to see you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invite, and hello, Dana. Hello, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share actually all our insight. So first of all, I have 2 decades of experience in the data world with the implementation of AI system cross industry, across clients. I got the opportunity to lead a huge and fantastic data science practice around the world in my previous life with fantastic people. So that's one aspect why this topic is very fascinating. The second one, it is I co-create a Rollcage. And Rollcage is an AI software platform dedicated to compliance and governance. So having the combination of the practitioner, but as well the implementation of AI governance system, I think is a very, very good combination to support organization on the digital transformation and more importantly, the usage of AI systems across the world.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for those great introductions. Now we do have a little sense of who you are and your backgrounds. So I'd like to dive a bit deeper into your personal insights that directly retakes to today's topic. So I have a few questions aligned with each of your expertise. So let's get started. So my first one would be for Dina. So with your deep knowledge in health policy and compliance, what key compliance issues do you think HR leaders should be mindful of when integrating AI into their processes?
Yeah, so like I said before, it's a really exciting time for AI technology, but it's also a weird time for compliance because there's so many unknowns. So some companies are just foregoing AI altogether, and that's their shortcut to avoiding complicated compliance concerns and risks. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so I would encourage HR leaders who want to incorporate AI tools into their work to follow a few rules of thumb. So the first is to remember compliance requirements that exist today will also exist when you start getting your work done using AI or assisted by AI. So a very easy example is that you can't have discriminatory practices. And so likewise, you can't use AI tools that will cause or contribute to discriminatory hiring. So that's an easy example, but there's lots of others out there. So just think about what compliance programs do you have now? And remember that just because an AI would be doing the thing doesn't mean that it's a loophole around current compliance requirements. The second one is to get to know your AI. Before you start using any tool, you want to make sure that you understand how it works. The vendor should be able to tell you what it does with the data that you send to it, and it should be able to explain how its AI works, and be clear with you on what the limitations are for their tools. So no tool can do everything perfectly, and you want to understand whether the tool you're looking at is right for you. If your team does not have the expertise to do this type of vetting, connect with others in your organization that do. So, for example, at Transcarent, we have an AI governance committee. And the committee is made up of a broad group of members who have a diverse background and also a wide range of expertise. And so that group is able to assist teams and business lines such as HR in vetting a tool and figuring out whether it's appropriate or not. And then finally, I'll end with the third thing, and that's to pay attention to what's going on in the state legislatures. If you're in the United States, obviously, if you're in another country, look at what's going on in your country. Use of AI in employment decisions is a hot topic here in the US. And the first ever comprehensive state AI law that passed recently in Colorado was specifically focused on when AI is used in employment-related decisions, as well as other important areas in people's lives. So you need to comply with the laws and regulations that already exist. Make sure that you understand the technology that you want to bring on, and pay attention to what's going on with policymakers wherever you are.
Awesome. Do anyone have any thoughts to add on to it?
I think if I rebound a little bit on the concept of committee, I will re-emphasize this dimension. AI implementation is a kind of multidisciplinary exercise. It's a team sport. Yes, we need to have a data science, team software engineering, but as well legal, compliance, working together with product manager. So to be sure that we use properly this technology, it has to be a team sport. And the spirit that every organization needs to implement it is literally this one. We are together using this technology in order to be successful.
Great. While we are with you, I have a question for you. So, with you do have a strong background in business ethics. So, how would you recommend that HR professionals go about identifying and mitigating the risk associated with AI in HR functions?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the compliment as well. It's true that at the time we developed some ethics framework on my previous role. So I will say, in order to manage the risk in the HR department, first of all, I think it's very, very important that everybody have the basic right, have basic understanding of AI. So that's one dimension. And as well, at the moment we talk about Colorado AI bill, but as well in the EU, we have a lot of framework. We have the OCED framework, EII framework. So we have already a lot of emergence framework related to ethics, but we need to be fully aware. So that's how we say the first step. The second step, it is, right, what kind of use cases I apply AI. So what are my AI system where eventually I run this in production or dev in order to make a proper registry of all my AI system. Once I have a good understanding of, I will say, of my landscape, I need to deep dive, go on the data, and as well eventually understand the impact. What kind of impact this system have on human, on any kind of action that will change, I will say, the life of every employee. Once you have a good understanding, I will say, of the ecosystem and the underlying risk and the impact, well, you need to think about mitigations. So you need to put in place some mitigation strategy around your ecosystem for each AI system, depending as well the regulations. So the regulation aspect is very, very, very critical, and it's coming very important based on different territory. Lastly, once you mitigate, the next step it is to control across the time. It's important to mitigate, but it's not enough. There is a time dimension to this process. So be sure that we have a committee, be sure that our data scientists monitor the underlying risk, and I will say everything will be under control. So it's a continuous exercise across the time, across the organizations, and across the function in order to be successful and to manage properly the risk.
Any thoughts?
I'll just add that was a great layout of it. The only other thing that I would think is that we want to make sure that we continue paying attention to what's going on with the AI over time after it's implemented. And so a quick looking at it, everything before you implement it, and then later on, look and see, is it having the result that I expected? Is the result not how I expected? So with the hiring example, is the talent that's coming forward like a different mix than you would have expected? And is the AI maybe impacting who is getting surfaced and who is not? And then making sure that your mitigation measures are actually working the way that you expected.
If I may as well,
Yeah.
yes, indeed, it is very, very, very important to control, but as well, to raise the consciousness at the organization about the AI culture. Everybody have to understand, and everybody have to be concerned about this potential risk that have massive potential risk across the business, from the P&L and reputation.
Yes. And Tiffany, with your extensive work in diversity and inclusion, how do you see AI tools influencing equity in the workspace? And what steps would organizations take to make sure these tools don't unintentionally scale bias or compliance risks?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. Both the panelists previously have already started to kind of speak to this, in that we can't look to AI to essentially not operate from a place of bias without some kind of intervention. Just because AI is doing the work does not mean that bias is not present. And in fact, sometimes it actually can exacerbate the bias that was already present, because with human beings, often we're functioning with unconscious bias, and so we're not necessarily consciously making certain decisions, though it may be that we are producing biased results. With AI, it is actually making, those quote unquote conscious decisions. It's making some very clear decisions based on the previous data that it has been trained with that may have been riddled with that bias. And there's already been several companies that have had to kind of learning from using those kinds of data sets. For example, Amazon utilized AI in its hiring processes, and it was found to have been biased against women. Specifically, the AI was being fed resumes of previously successful candidates, which were mostly predominantly men, and it was biased against the word women or women's colleges on resumes, just as an example. There's also been cases of using AI in video interviews where it is analyzing facial expressions and voice tones and body language. And those kinds of things can be biased against, marginalized groups, particularly women, people of color, as well as neurodivergent applicants as well. So it's really important that HR professionals get upskilled in HR legislation in terms of employment law, but also the emerging AI laws that are kind of coming to a kind of intersection. Right now, as the previous panelists have discussed, there's only been like some limited movement in that space, but we do need to kind of keep a pulse on that. So one of the core things to do is to understand that AI is not without bias. It's not necessarily, just like a cure-all type of situation. And also to make sure that you are upskilling yourself as it relates to the laws in the space, both federal and state-based, as well as, really start to do that work or continue on that journey in terms of your own examination of your bias.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have a couple of core questions that we'd like to discuss in today's panel. While we do that, I would like to request our audience to feel free to drop in your comments or questions that's related to today's topics, and also follow our panelists on LinkedIn if you already don't. So they will be helpful to answer any of your questions after the panel or anything related to the talk. Yes, so before that, let's jump on to our panel questions. So the first one I have for you is, what are the key compliance issues HR leaders should consider when integrating AI into their processes? Who would like to go first?
If you don't mind?
Yes.
Perfect. So, on my previous question, I talk about use cases. I think what is very, very critical at the beginning of any kind of deployment of resources for the installation of an AI system, it is to have a good description of the use cases, what's the objective, what kind of decision will be applied, and as well, what kind of data will be used in order to feed the system. So this good understanding will help as well to decide if there is some specific regulation involved, where it will be applied. It will be applied in specific country, Colorado, or it will be applied in the EU eventually, or in the UK. So understanding the usage and the application, I will say it is the first thing. Once you know on which perimeter, I will say you apply your use cases, I will say the first thing, and I think Tiffany mentioned it very well, it's about the data, and you need to understand actually the nature of the data in terms of bias. That's the first thing, but as well in terms of other factors related to compliance, such as GDPR and others, depending the regulations. Then indeed you need to think about it depending the regulation and the compliance requirement. It is, for example, the dimension of explainability and transparency. Does my system it's explainable and transparent. So do I able to attend or to explain actually my decision that will impact eventually, depending the nature of my use cases, colleagues on their career, on their operations, on their learning plan, etc., etc., etc. So having kind of breakdown, importantly, the first step, it is the mapping between the use cases and potential regulation. I think it's a very, very, very important dimension to do for any kind of implementation in HR world.
Such valuable insights, really appreciate it. And do someone like to add on it?
No, I agree actually with what was just said, and specifically just wanted to call out that discrimination is certainly one of those top trend of issues to be mindful of when considering this intersection of compliance in HR. And that is the case across the talent life cycle. So, at the talent acquisition stage where we're making those hiring decisions, as well as in the performance management stage where we're thinking about things like raises or performance management plans, as well as offboarding and things like layoff decisions. There have been lawsuits at every aspect of that talent lifestyle, that life cycle decision-making process because of bias and because of discrimination across that cycle. So it's very much important to pay attention to this. However, understanding and checking bias is not something that we can just necessarily just do off the side of our desk. This is something that actually has to be practiced with intention. And in the best in class organizations, they actually do even have dedicated headcounts for people who are in that intersection of responsible AI or diversity and inclusion, what have you. And across the country in the United States, we've been seeing some, crosswinds as it relates to diversity and inclusion roles. And we've actually been seeing a lot of those roles being eliminated, which is actually a red flag for where this space can go because you are seeing an exit of people who are deeply trained in the area of kind of sorting through and identifying bias and leading those teams. So it is on everyone then to essentially raise the bar and really kind of get a better understanding of this area of bias, because this is actually a very, very business critical area because it ultimately can put the company at risk as well as severely impact the employee populations.
Awesome. Jumping on to our next one, how can HR professionals proactively identify and mitigate risks associated with AI, especially in critical areas like hiring and employment management?
I'll jump in on that one. It's a great question. Obviously, it's a very complicated question. And the first thing that you look at is what are the laws and regulations where you are located, where your employees are. And so it's going to vary. But when it comes to employment and especially avoiding discrimination, I think there is some consistency across borders. And obviously, this is a very complicated topic. So one thing that I do recommend is trying to standardize the documentation that you're doing for these to help everybody think through the issues. So start with a form, start with a committee, and put onto these form questions that you want to make sure that your team is asking. So with avoiding discrimination that Dr. Bowden just did such a great job laying out, I want to make sure that everybody is thinking through the fact that tools like technology, people tend to over rely on them and feel like, oh, well, I put it into the system and then the system said the thing and now it's right. And it looks very neat and it's packaged, but that doesn't always make it right. And when you're the user deploying the tool, when the tool makes a mistake or has a discriminatory impact on your employees or on your hiring, then you've made that impact. And so it is very important that you do proactively identify and mitigate risks associated with AI. And so some of the things that you're able to do is beforehand, get to know limitations of the tool and ask the AI developers what they've done to test the system for biases, for example. Some different countries and different regions are already requiring levels of transparency around these, but it's not guaranteed in every place where you may operate. And some of those areas of biases may be unintentional. We would hope they'd be unintentional, and they may not be known. But if we're not testing for it, then we're probably not going to be catching it. So you should be asking these questions of the AI developers. Find out what their data set was, how large it was, whether it was representative, like a representative sample of the people that you would using this AI on. So if they created an entire database, like Dr. Boda was just talking about, where the resumes, it was trained on resumes that were mostly men, and then suddenly the AI was recommending men for roles. Well, we need to ask questions about what is the sample and does that apply to where we're going to use it. And then, like I was touching on a little bit earlier, once you've implemented an AI tool, you need to keep paying attention to how it acts. So look at the outcomes over a period of time, but prior to launching the AI, and then look at the outcomes after launching the AI. Have the outcomes changed in a way that was unexpected? I know I mentioned that before, but it's kind of one of those like easier tasks that you can do that can have a big impact. If you were already looking at resumes before, and then you started using an AI, and suddenly the resumes that are getting surfaced are a different type of sample than what you had gotten on your own, is that a good change or is it not a good change? And if it's not a good change, you want to go back and look at it. Was there a change in the resumes you were getting? And I'm just using that as like the clear example. Or it's a change to the AI. And if that's the case, then you need to do a little more digging on, was this a result of the AI? Is it how we set up the AI? So it's a lot of different questions, but when you set up like a form for yourself, then you might want to look at, what am I using this AI for? Like, what's my goal of using this AI? What is this AI supposed to be used for? Do they match? What data do I have available to use on this AI? What data does this AI require? And what was this AI model itself trained on? And after you understand all of those, then you have a better understanding of what the risks are that you might be taking on using it. And then you can also start mapping out, what can you do to mitigate those risks?
I will add one sentence, so I will say de facto. So first of all, Dana, thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. I will just add one sentence. It is, as soon as we have some AI system on the world of HR, I will say we need to be systematically cautious, because it's literally go on the human. It's different when you put a system, for example, to machine to monitor, to predict, for example, a machine in a plant. But here we talk about human being. So de facto, the HR leader need to be aware and to be conscious that potential risk, and it have been highlighted by recent regulation, that this domain of application deserve full attention from compliance and the team that implemented and installed the system in the organization.
Thank you. And Tiffany, would you like to add on to it, or do we jump on to the next one?
I think that the previous panelists covered it really well. But what I will say is that the things that are being elevated are things to just consider regardless of where you're sitting in the business. Some of the best practices that are being elevated, such as making sure that you have a diverse sample when it comes to your research group and your test group before launching something. It's just like kind of, best practices as it relates to, research in general. But this is something that very often kind of falls by the wayside in businesses, by way of, citing lack of resources, lack of time, and a host of other kinds of issues. But it's very important to prioritize this, which does take the necessary resources. It does take making sure that you are actually casting a wide net and understanding the full scope of where your product or service can touch. That is generally kind of what gets impacted at this particular intersection.
Yeah, Sneha, can I as well add something on this? It is, the measurement of potential bias is not straightforward from a technical standpoint. It's very important to do it. So, for example, for mitigation purpose, of course, on the data, as Dr. Tiffany said, but technically speaking, there is some barrier and it's not straightforward. So having a set of metrics is very helpful to have a sense about the potential risk. And this is the duty of the data scientists to do it, to examine different type of metrics, to identify potential issue here and potential risk. So there is no, I will say, full consensus due to the multiplicity of metrics as well. So it's a lot of hard work here for any kind of practitioner.
I love those insights. And would you share us with few best practices for ensuring that AI deployment in HR adheres to legal and ethical standards? Who would like to get the first step?
I can go if you want. Oh, sorry, Tiffany.
I was just going to say, I think that we've been kind of alluding to it in some of the previous answers, but I think that what's really important for HR professionals to understand is that, in a lot of cases, there's going to be more ethical considerations than there are legal considerations for AI, only because it's an emerging field. And the laws are still trying to catch up. But that doesn't mean that there are not already existing laws that are there that are very, very much at play, such as those that we already kind of understand as it relates to employment law as well. But something else that also hasn't necessarily been discussed is just simply company policies. And that if you as an HR professional are utilizing these HR tools to kind of simplify your work, and perhaps you're feeding the AI, documents or templates, it's very important to know that you could be exposing risk not only to the company, but to employees as well. So then that opens up additional exposure as well. So it's really important then, as an HR professional to understand that when you're interacting with AI tools, to not feed it personally identifiable information or information that might be protected by trademark or copyright or company policy. And of course, to just be mindful of the laws that we're already mindful of, governing employment law, as well as the emerging laws for AI.
From a practitioner standpoint, as I said, it's not straightforward to manage these kind of situations. There is some emerging technique, in terms of to assess the quality of the output from, for example, from a bias perspective. There is different technique, but this is probably more from a data science viewer. I'm pretty sure they are there as well. But we can use LLM as judge. I think this is a very, very powerful element, and we can fine tune them in order to be sure that they are under the guardrail, if I may say. So this is actually an avenue of research very, very exciting. We use an LLM to measure the potential bias of your AI systems. On top of the list of metrics that we have, the list of metrics that we can have in terms of biased and other matter are very useful, and then we can use kind of technique to debias the data. But these have an impact as well on the quality of the system. So we need to understand as well what does it mean from data, but as well from quality of the system. So, and under the umbrella of the framework or that you apply or you operating, So there is a lot of consideration to have beyond the legal, but as well from a data science perspective.
I'm just going to hop in with a very quick add-on because everyone else covered so many great points. And this is just to answer the high-level question of how do we ensure compliance with laws when those laws are constantly evolving and changing. And so my recommendation is that if your organization has a legal and compliance division, you should appoint an individual to own tracking those legal and ethical considerations and standards. That person should be charged with keeping the organization compliant, and they should also be given the authority to drive teams towards compliance. And so this may actually be a new role within your organization, or maybe a person who's already there and they've got their role, but their role may expand. If you don't have someone in mind for that, you can check within your organization and see if there is someone who is interested in developing that area of expertise. So in addition to my law degree, I myself have a certificate in AI governance from the IAPP. And you may find that it's worth your budget to ask who in your company wants to step into this and support that person in going through a training and certification process so that you have in-house expertise who knows the area to keep track of and will help be able to put that forward within your company.
Great. Okay, as we've got insights from all the panelists, we will be jumping on to our next topic. So, how can organizations prepare for the evolving regulatory landscape surrounding AI, both domestically as well as globally?
I will take this one first because it resonates massively. If you, for example, if you're a chief data AI officer, global head of data science, first of all, when you have to manage so many countries, so many regulations, the first point of attack, it is to have a registry, an AI registry, where you centralize and identify all your use cases, all the application and usage from your user in the world, and it can become very, very complex. So the first point of entry it is to have a good registry in order to understand well what you have in your AI real estate. The second one, it is once you do this mapping, then after that you can talk with your corresponding legal compliance department and as well your team in the ground that implemented this. I think in this fragmented compliance environment, having everything on track, this is very, very, very important because things can evolve. This can go this can go in a specific way that if you don't know any kind of usage that you have, you lose control, and that's not possible on this current age because you have a regulation obligation that will impede you anyway, and you are at risk. So that's, I will say, my first point of control. We know that we have emerging application of the coming regulation, and there is a gradual application of these, depending as well the risk that you have. So if you are at high risk or unacceptable, you need to make already some decisions, in particular on the EU. So centralization, understanding of your risk, and as well application of the current regulation for specific type of AI. That will be my advice for preparation.
I would also say too, at least domestically in the United States, that a lot of these things are kind of politically influenced, meaning that, there are, left-leaning states that might view AI a particular way and therefore subsequently encourage particular kinds of legislation. More right-leaning states may kind of have a different take. I would say that so far what we're seeing is the more left-leaning states are tending to favor putting more legislation on the books. So as we are in this election season, kind of paying attention to those things and being able to kind of mentally forecast where we may potentially be going is something to pay attention to. But even regardless of that, just kind of paying attention to what states are kind of bringing forth the most legislation, and then just kind of gearing yourself more so to look at the most stringent of those areas. Kind of in the same way that within employment law, we understand that California tends to have a significant amount more laws on the books, and be a much more litigious area than in many other places. It's not very much different within the AI space. So California and Colorado, as an example, do have a lot more AI governance and leadership at the legislation level. So paying attention to those things as well. And then as it relates to that global expansion, the United States does tend to kind of do the pace setting. And other countries do tend to kind of look to the United States as to what our laws are doing, and then they sometimes implement. So it's very much important that we get these things right, because we're not only influencing what happens in our workplaces in the United States, but also kind of more broadly as well.
Awesome. Okay, jumping on to our next topic. What role do HR leaders play in balancing innovation with regulatory compliance when adopting AI solutions?
I'll jump in. HR should obviously be part of the conversation. Ideally, any company that expects to have a large AI footprint will pull together an AI governance committee, and that committee should include HR. So at Transcarent, we do have an AI governance committee, and we made sure that there is an HR representative who serves as a member of that committee. Smaller companies or companies that don't expect to lean heavily in AI should still involve HR in adopting AI solutions, especially when employee data is involved. I would say anytime employee data may be involved using an AI system, you would have to have HR be involved in that implementation to make sure that we're thinking through all of the important topics that we've already covered on this call.
I would say as well, it's a kind of a natural thing to be really excited about technology and to want to, rush to kind of implement and to be a part of that early adoption, phase. But I would say to kind of tread with some caution if you don't fully understand the technologies that you're trying to implement. And, to really truly ask yourself, ultimately, why are you wanting to do this, and is it necessary? Those would be some of the things to kind of think of. I've worked in several organizations, and this is certainly prominent in tech, where there's just like this kind of a zeal that more tech is better. And sometimes that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you just simply don't need to bring in this new and shiny thing. Sometimes what was already working was working really well. And maybe you don't need to add this extra layer of complexity, and you can just, kind of take your time and monitor how, a tool is being developed, and allow other organizations to, to kind of take their adventures and just to kind of view the case studies and kind of see what happens. You don't have to necessarily be the guinea pig in these cases. So that is something to consider as well.
Yeah, if I may add on this one, it's a very good one. I think having a risk-reward approach is very, very important, because even though in any kind of AI use cases, you need to understand, all right, if I deploy this, is it worth it? It will create productivity improvement, but as well, at what cost? But on top of that, because we're talking about HR, we are quite regulated in particular. So how we say the cost of compliance and regulation need to be added on the risk side and the cost side. So having a comprehensive view, not only of the benefit of the implementation of any kind of system, but as well integrating additional constraints, I think it's very, very fundamental. The matter as well of size is very, very critical, because if you're a small employee, you don't need to have this kind of technology as you say, shiny tool. It's not relevant.
Great insights. I love that. While we are still on the subject, so I would also like to ask, what steps should HR professionals take to stay ahead of regulatory changes related to AI in HR?
Should I go?
Yes.
Well, I will say everything is moving, so we need to learn all the time. Having access to specialists from a compliance perspective, like Dana and Tiffany, I think is very, very important. But as well, having an overview of what's happening on the AI governance, like Rollcage or other competitor, will simplify, I will say, the integration of these new regulations. So everything is moving. We need to keep moving. We need to learn all the time. It's a necessity.
Would anyone like to add upon that?
I feel like we've touched on a lot of the points already, so I don't want to be too repetitive of what everybody's heard. But a lot of the questions and answers that we're giving today focus on making sure that you understand the tools that you're choosing to use. Make sure you understand it before you implement it. And I really strongly recommend having a formal documentation procedure for this type of thing. I know I mentioned a form before. Sometimes forms make the hard things easier. They help you think through the different things that you should be aware of. And it helps you later on when you're saying, why did we implement that? What were we thinking? What did we know about it? What do we know now? And that becomes even more relevant as we see regulatory landscape changing, because a lot of the times we're seeing that policymakers are moving towards programs where documentation is required and certain questions are required to be answered and known before tools are implemented. So if you already have a strong culture of AI governance and clean hygiene ahead of time, when those new requirements come down, you're already ready. If you already have a form and you already have documentation steps, you can just add the new questions or modify some of them. But if you haven't been in the practice of really, really understanding that AI before you implement it and testing it and looking back on it, if you don't already have that as part of your culture, it is very difficult to implement that when a new regulation comes down the line.
Spot on. Okay, so before we close up today's panel, I do have one straightforward question. So, who should be in charge of the compliance and mitigation for HR?
I think we're all laughing because there's so many different people who would be great at this. It's really going to depend on what your company does, who your company is, and what team, like what role different teams take. So at Transcarent, obviously, I do a lot of the leadership on this. I'm the chair of the AI governance committee, but I don't work alone. Like I said before, we have members from all across the organization. So the answer for who should be in charge of it is really going to depend on your organization, who has the interest, the energy, and the professional skills around it. But also, how is your company organized and who normally would lead a compliance type activity?
And I agree with Dina on this, in that when I think of this, I think of this as something that needs to be a team effort. Ultimately, it can all roll up to a singular stopping point where the buck stops there. But in terms of how the actual sausage gets made, I think that there has got to be a lot of hands on deck, because there are certainly a lot of pitfalls in a lot of areas where things can fall out. And I do want to elevate that for a lot of organizations, they are choosing to bring on responsible AI practitioners. That's certainly how I've been in my roles, because that is effectively a large part of our job, not only to look at compliance, but also to look at ethics as well, and you know, kind of bridge those things, because sometimes what's legal to do is not necessarily the thing that is right to do, or the thing that is a best fit for your company culture. So these are the things that a responsible AI practitioner would be looking to. So I would say that considering bringing in professionals that is their sole role, in a way, is also very important, as well as you know, keeping an eye on things like accessibility and data transparency. All of those things can only assist, you know, in the end.
I can't more agree than with Dana and Dr. Tiffany. The thing for me, it is ownership. So we need to have clear ownership of these situations on the organization, if it's a committee, but at least sometimes it's better to personalize, because if it's a CTO of a legal general counsel, someone needs to take ownership about the project and be sure that things are moving forward. The other thing it is as well to support any kind of organization having system in place in combination of ethics specialists. It's now, based on the complexity and fragmentation, it's a must.
Thank you. As we close, so I would request each one of you to provide one quick key piece of advice you would give to HR leaders on managing compliance and mitigating risks as AI becomes more integrated in HR processes. Dina, would you like to go?
We're all so excited, but also very polite and waiting for each other. I think that just the key advice that I would give to HR leaders is that AI is complicated and it's exciting. It could do great things. It could do bad things. And so I would encourage all leadership to think about what their opportunities are. Don't avoid AI altogether in order to avoid compliance. I think this is a tool that we're going to see increasingly implemented across our professional lives. So just try to become more educated. Joining this webinar was a great step in informing yourself, and also make sure that you bring in individuals all across your organization so that everyone is aware that AI is a great tool, but has risks, and what your organization does. One other thing that Transcarent did is that we launched our own AI principles across our organization to make sure that everyone's on the same page about where our priorities are in terms of like wanting to use AI, but wanting to use it safely. And so I would encourage anybody who's on here to work with, again, a broad group of stakeholders to align on what principles are important for your organization, and make sure that everybody in the organization is aware we're not going to avoid AI, but we're going to be careful. We're going to walk into it thoughtfully, and we are going to follow these principles that our company thinks are important.
Great takeaway.
And I would say, you know, also make sure that you're connecting with people who are seasoned in the field, who are, you know, I wouldn't say experts in the field, because I don't think at this point anybody is a bona fide expert, because we're still learning so much and everything changes every single day. But there are people who are kind of operating in this space more than others, and who are learning their particular areas and their particular subjects. So the people on this panel, they all have a wealth of knowledge, and likely could assist you by way of, you know, being a speaker or a consultant, or They may have services that may assist you either as an individual or even for your organization in full. Tapping into those resources as appropriate is really, really key. Like in my case, I've been run into organizations to lead book clubs, as well as to do kind of one-on-one coaching, as well as training specifically on responsible AI, because it's not necessarily an area that is like always kind of fully thought of, and it's a fairly newer space and a kind of niche space. The other panelists have like their own areas of specialization, so just make sure that you're tapping into those resources that they have.
Yeah, for me, it is, I alluded or explicitly said, it's about having this kind of risk-reward mindset all the time to find the best trade-off in terms of feasibility, in terms of decisions. So all the time is almost a decision of investment. So you need to understand the implication of the implementation of any kind of system in your department. So that's one thing. The second thing for me, it is more the fun part. Even whatever the outcome of your risk-reward analysis, still learning, play with any kind of system you can find, for free or development, with the data scientists, be informed, be updated on any kind of recent technology, because things are accelerating massively. Some use cases eventually will be too much risky now, but eventually with new technique of the bias of the data that will become very effective one day, use cases that you discarded eventually will become feasible under any kind of regulation. So that's my view on the progress of data science. But keep updated, keep moving, keep learning, and have fun with AI.
Thank you all for such an insightful and engaging discussion. It's been great hearing from each one of you on your amazing perspectives on how AI can be integrated responsibly while managing compliance and mitigating risks. I'm very sure that our audience gained valuable takeaways that they can apply to their own organizations or startups or in any field of expertise. And we look forward to continuing these important conversations as AI continues to shape the future of HR. Thank you again for all your patience, and also to all the panelists and everyone who joined us today. See you all in the next panel. And audience, please do register and join us for all the upcoming panels or of your interested topics. So you can find us on hackinghrlab.io, and see you all in the next panel. Thank you.